Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Jim Duffy, Executive Vice President and CHRO for the CIT Group, a financial holding company based in New York City. Jim, thank you very much for coming down today. We certainly appreciate having you here on campus.
My pleasure.
One of the things that I've heard you speak about with some frequency is your belief that HR can really drive change. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
My view is, I think, sometimes we just hang on. Sometimes we can help drive it. There's no one type of change in my view. And oh, by the way, in today's environment, change is a constant. But there's sort of externally driven change, internally driven change, planned, unplanned. It all depends. Some of the stuff, 9/11, hostile takeovers, that stuff you grab on and you go along for the ride. Planned change, culture change, those kinds of things are so dependent upon a number of things that we in HR own and can support, like policies, practices, platforms, compensation, the types of things that you need to align with wherever you want to go. And the other is, we're sort of the canary in the coal mine. So we can raise the flag if in fact we're not heading where it is we say we want to go. We're not being consistent about what it is we want to do. And change is so much about not only saying where you want to go, but reinforcing, communicating, that HR is one of the few objective partners in the whole process that can raise the flag.
So can you say a little bit more about that? About what do you mean by one of the few objective partners in the process?
HR is really one of the more interesting places to work in a company. And over time, you'll talk to people and they'll say, I really like working here because it's the one place where we know everything that's going on. So not only do you know what's going on from a business perspective, but you understand people share things with you. You hear things. It's an ear to the ground kind of function. And my view of HR generalists in particular, but all HR, but generalists in particular, is that you've got to have sort of this sixth sense. You've got to think in terms of second and third order effects. You have to be a cynic. And HR naturally is the one place that is viewed by others in the organization as sort of the independent third-party view of all things going on in an organization. And you'll get enough information to form a point of view and understand what's going on that no one else will.
So then that makes me think that one of the really critical functions of HR or responsibilities is to be the group that is honest, that is keeps the secrets, is fully confidential at all times.
No question. I mean, you get one shot. If you breach a confidence, you're done. You don't have a career in that organization any longer. People have to believe that you're the honest broker, and you have to be. I mean, it's top of the list.
So another thing that I've heard you talk about a lot is the role of talent in driving business success. Can you say a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, everything, whether it's a strategy or a process or an initiative, requires people to execute, to design, to work. And so, we call it talent, but we're just talking about human capital. And, if you were a baseball player and you were a career 300 hitter, you'd be in the Hall of Fame. But if you're in HR and you're selecting talent and you're a career 300 hitter, you'll be out of work. So, it's an art. It's not a science. But being able to understand the culture, the environment, and what you need in terms of competencies, what you need in terms of personality, what you need in terms of behavior, that's simply what talent is, and you got to find enough of it and put it in the right places and figure out what to do with it when you get it. And everybody else in the organization owns a little piece of that, but nobody is encumbered with that as a day-to-day as much as HR is. So for me, if you can't, you can't be a talent scout, if you can't recruit people, if you can't then develop people, you can't engage people, you're probably in the wrong business.
You've obviously been extremely successful in identifying and helping develop talent. Do you have any keys that have really stood out for you or really helped you?
Well, I think there's the technical side of it, which is make sure you have appropriate job descriptions and all the rest of that. But a lot of it to me is innate, and you have to trust your instincts around assessing people. And it's more about fit than it is about their technical expertise. I mean, it's easy to understand competencies. It's easy to understand technical skills and backgrounds, formal educational background. And you can actually hire people to do those kinds of assessments. But for me, it's really about understanding whether or not they'll fit in an organization. So things like behavioral interviews are really important. And you learn over time how to do that without having to go through a rote process. But you do it long enough, and I've done it for a long time, and you have to trust your instincts. And usually, if you're still in the job, your instincts have proven out to be right more than they've proven to be wrong. But sometimes there are glorious mistakes, and we've all made them, and it humbles you, and you realize that, maybe I need to go back and review the process.
And you talk about fit as being one of the real important things. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means, every company has its own personality. Or institution has its own personality and its own culture. And it would seem that, it would be easy to decide who fits and who doesn't, but it's really about what interests you. It's about your personal values. It's about your behaviors. It's about your history. I value people who have gotten through diversity successfully, people with grit. There are things that are basic that would fit anywhere, but some of the stuff around the edges is the stuff that gets you in trouble, like, do people really believe what they say? Is there a genuine person behind, this is what I want to be? Are their personal ethics identifiable? And, if so, good. If not, you got to figure that out. And there's the personality issue. Who will work well with whom? And first you need to know what's the baseline, what's your organization like, and then try to figure out whether or not would I like working with this person. And it doesn't mean that you have to be your best friend, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody's an outlier, it's a problem.
And I presume this becomes even more important the higher up in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also it's tougher to assess people because they're much more skilled at the process of interviewing and understanding what the needs of the company are. And usually, though, there's a network available to everybody where somebody knows somebody who knows somebody that you'll get feedback on, whether or not it makes sense or doesn't. And I'm not talking about formal background checks. I'm just talking about the network.
And one of the things that we have seen in the research at CES is that one of the predictors of people not succeeding when they get into, particularly in the C-suite, is, again, just as you said, it's not the competencies which they have, but it's the lack of ability to fit with the culture. Do you see that as being a really key part in terms of like the functioning of that executive leadership team?
It is. The question you ask is, are we satisfied with the culture we have, or are we looking to change it? So, that's a case where you're probably looking for, to hire against type being what you've got now. And then you've got to assess, whether you've got an aggressive culture or whether you've got a passive-aggressive culture. And each of those require a different approach in terms of bringing folks in. If it's a passive-aggressive culture, you really want a change agent, somebody who's a little bit different, probably, than what you've got. But if you've got an aggressive culture, you want somebody who can appreciate that and manage it and maybe tamp it down where required. So, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And, I've learned over time that, you shouldn't get stars in your eyes if you have if there's a Hall of Famer out there that you want to hire. I've personally seen some of those hires go up in smoke because there's not been a fit.
You, of course, have great history of working in HR in the financial services. Can you say a little bit about what might be some of the unique challenges of HR in finance?
Yeah, I'm going to overstate this because it's just to make the point, but I found that the core bedrock HR practices that exist in manufacturing go deeper, have been there longer, and are more robust and well-developed than in financial services. And that's just a function of how these businesses have grown over time. In financial services, it was, particularly through the 70s and 80s, who can hire the top 3% of MBAs. That's what HR does, and will reward you for getting the best and the brightest. In manufacturing, most everything is done, and a lot of service industries as well, but most everything is done in a team environment. So, you've got groups of 10 to 12 to 20 people, and the leveling effect of a group that large sort of knocks off the highs and the lows. So, you just need to make sure you've got your fit right and you've got enough complementary skills with respect to technical expertise. But there's balance over time that not one person can drive the wrong behaviors in a work unit. In financial services, as 2008 proved to us, one bad hire can bring a company down, because virtually every senior person that you hire in financial services can make a credit decision. And one bad credit decision can bring a company down. So I think the need for better selection, better process exists in financial services purely from a hiring and development perspective. And it's a much more forgiving environment in manufacturing because of the fact that you've got so many checks and balances in place given the large size. And there's not one decision that gets made by any team member in manufacturing, for the most part, that can bring a company down, unlike financial services.
So that really highlights that in the financial services area, HR is a critical component of risk management.
Correct. Absolutely.
So is when you think of your own job, do you think of yourself as head of risk in some way?
Well,
also?
My scorecard and my direct reports scorecards have an operational risk component. So absolutely. And we have teams and committees to look at our compensation programs, to look at our sales compensation programs from a risk perspective. If you think about Wells Fargo and their sales practices issues, that's all about HR managing or not managing risk, not just HR, but it's a big piece of what HR does, those plan designs and all of the controls that are in place.
And now if we think back to, you brought up 2008, 2009 as a scary time for all of us, but particularly in the financial services area. Can you talk a little bit what that was like, kind of maybe holistically, but particularly from an HR perspective?
Well, it was high stress, to say the least. But when Bear Stearns fell and then Lehman fell, it really scared all of us, most of us, and particularly those of us that were in smaller institutions that had mortgage portfolios, which is where most of the toxic waste sat. So the issue for us was, are we going to fall like everyone else has fallen? Our issue also was that we were not a bank in the traditional sense. We had just applied for bank holding company status, but we were a wholesale funded institution, and we were really at the mercy of the vagaries of the market, capital markets. So where we ended up was in a prepackaged bankruptcy. So in some respects, we were able to take our future into our own hands, although it was high risk in that no financial services firm had ever successfully emerged from bankruptcy. But we had no option at that point, so off we went. And the fact of the urgency of the bankruptcy and the focus that was required to execute the bankruptcy, in some ways, was a good thing, because it kept people focused on a task, a very narrow 24/7, 40-day task. And when we came out the other side successfully, there was a sense of relief, but then there was also a sense of now what? So for us, it was lots of terror, it was lots of risk, but there was a lot to do that was productive and focused on saving the company. So I think that was somewhat helpful.
Can you say a little bit about how HR's role changes or doesn't change during that kind of time?
It's interesting. It becomes really more of a highly engaged administrative force that we spent a lot of time working on the details of the bankruptcy. There's lots of data generation, lots of concern from people about whether or not the creditors were going to access deferred compensation plans, 401k plans. Will there be a severance policy that survives this, or the creditor's going to wipe out any potential for that? So we spent our time really doing triage around keeping people settled that A, these decisions haven't been made. B, there's some history here. We think we understand where it's going. We don't ever know for sure, but we feel good about X, Y, and Z. But doing it transparently and not trying to mislead them. So it was sort of an all hands on deck communications process. Lots of hand holding. The fact of the matter is there was attrition that was to be expected. And our hope was that we'd come out the other side, at least with the core of our intellectual capital employees.
And do you think that was the key? Is that extraordinary communication? Is that what helps get people through when all the employees are terrified that there may not even be a company?
That's really all you've got at that point. You don't have a strategic plan because that went out the window. You don't have 5 key objectives because it's irrelevant. You have one key objective, which is to get through the bankruptcy. So all we had as a tool was the ability to communicate and also to work on a more one-on-one basis. You spend a lot more time in very small groups of employees, and you spend a lot of time doing rumor control because it runs rampant. And oftentimes, sometimes rumors turn out to be true, even though it didn't begin as such. So you do your best to get in front of all that stuff. So it was all hands on deck, and 24/7, keep your phone open, check your emails, and make sure you're keeping people apprised of what's going on.
And another unique experience that you've had is being the head of HR for now the same company at 2 different times. Can you say a little bit about what that is like, or what it was like coming back in particular?
Well, first of all, it was. I've always been a proponent of if you're really, really lucky in life, you get to choose your boss. Not all of us get to do that, and I've been able to do that several times. Requires a change of employers at times, but when I left CIT the first time, it was to join a company and a leader that I had a great deal of respect for and had worked with before, and he had left Ally at a point in time, and another leader that I had worked with at Citigroup had become CEO at CIT. So, had she been at company XYZ or ABC, I would have elected to do likewise with either of those firms. But it was just happenstance it was CIT. And the good news is a lot of the people that were there my first tour of duty were still there. The things about the company that I admired most the first time through, which is the quality of the people, the collegial atmosphere, the lack of corporate politics, sort of the focus on the customer, were still there. They were and I think that's why it's survived all these generations. But it was for the first month or so, it felt kind of weird. And then at about month 3 or 4, it really felt like it was just a continuation from my first tour of duty, as if the interlude had never happened.
And so now I've also heard you talk about the importance, if you're lucky, to be able to choose your own boss. Why is it so important to be able to do that?
Well, much like we talked earlier about, fit, for me, I've always believed that the senior HR executive needs to have their office between the CEO's office and the restroom, because you're doing a lot of rumor control. You're trying to manage information as much as you're doing anything else. And if you don't have the kind of relationship with the CEO that gives you the opportunity to do that, and also opens up the possibility that you can share information directly and unvarnished with the CEO, it's not going to be a successful tour of duty, for sure. So if you've got a CEO that you have a personal relationship with, not that you're best friends, but that you understand each other's working style, there's confidence in you, there's trust in you, it makes the job, it gives you an opportunity to be successful, and B, it makes the job that much easier. So in this case, for me, this was a no-brainer.
Jim, thank you very much for coming down and for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Anthony.
We love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Jim Duffy of CIT shared his views regarding HR in a financial services company. As you also heard, Jim explained how HR in the financial services industry is critical for achieving competitive advantages. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.